We are in the 21st lesson in the book of 2 Samuel, and the title of this lesson is The Mess After a Conspiracy and Mutiny. I started to title this something like, what are you going to do with the people that are left over that took place in the conspiracy or mutiny? But I didn't know how to make that a short little title, because this lesson is all about those people that David had to deal with who had been on Absalom's side in the conspiracy and the mutiny against him. Well, with the death of Absalom, it was time to handle the mess after the conspiracy and the mutiny, starting with this controversy existing with the tribe of Judah. If you remember, Judah had crowned Absalom to be the king, but the tribe had not returned its allegiance over to David as of this time, even though Absalom was dead. So as a result, the king had to engage with many defectors. Now let's back up in this lesson just a little bit so we can see all of the defectors of this mess after the conspiracy and the mutiny that David had to deal with, and how he dealt with each. So in chapter 19, verse number 11, it tells us this: Then King David sent to Zadok and Abiathar the priest, saying, Speak to the elders of Judah, saying, Why are you the last to bring the king back to his house, since the word of all Israel has come to the king, even to his house? You are my brothers, you are my bone and my flesh. Why then should you be the last to bring back the king? Now Zadok and Abiathar were still in Jerusalem, serving before the Ark of the Covenant, just exactly where David told them to go and what to do. And these two priests were major supporters of David. And so now David asked them, will you negotiate with the elders down in my tribal area of Judah? He had already heard from the other 11 tribes that they were willing for him to come back to be king in Jerusalem, and because of what he said to them. He said, since the word of all Israel has come to the king, even to his house. So why did Judah, David's family tribe, hold out? To help with the negotiations with Judah, David is going to make an offer, and he made an offer. Verse number 13. Say to Amasa, are you not my bone and my flesh? May God do so to me, and more also, if you will not be commander of the army before me continually in place of Joab. Oh my. Joab had been David's army commander since Joab climbed the sewer gutter to open the gates of the great citadel of the Jebusites that was thought to be impenetrable there on Mount Zion, so that David could capture it. Now that occurred in the 7th year of David's reign. Okay. Now we're in the 32nd year of David's reign, somewhere along in there. And so Joab has been commander for 23 to 25 years. Now David was willing to give Joab's job to Amasa, the son of David's half-sister, Abigail. Amasa was also a nephew of David. Joab was the son of David's half-sister Zeruiah, Amasa's aunt. Amasa and Joab were first cousins. Now, it doesn't mean first cousins like each other. David was taking the job away from one nephew and giving it to another nephew. So what did Amasa do with that information? Chapter 19, verse 14 tells us, Thus he turned the hearts of all the men of Judah as one man, so that they sent word to the king, saying, Return you and all your servants. The king then returned and came as far as the Jordan, and Judah came to Gilgal in order to go meet the king, to bring the king across the Jordan. The key to changing the hearts of Judah's people was David's offer of Joab's job to this man Amasa. It worked. The offer calmed Judah's leadership, and Judah fell in line to bring David back as king. This decision was undoubted because Joab disobeyed David's order concerning Absalom, and it worked. David was willing to give up Joab in order to bring the nation back together. Thus, Judah's leadership met David at Gilgal, just outside Jericho, to parade David back into Jerusalem. Remember, this is Camp Gilgal, not the city of Gilgal. Those are two different places. But then, as they came down to that ford to cross the Jordan River, there was also the lingering controversy with Shimei that had to be handled. You remember, Shimei was a sympathizer to Absalom's desire to become the king. It didn't mean he took part in it, but when David was leaving and fleeing from his son Absalom, leaving Jerusalem, Shimei had taken the opportunity to curse and throw stones at David. Now this time, Shimei had a different attitude towards David. Verse number 16. Then Shimei, the son of Gera, the Benjamite, who was from Bahurim, hurried and came down with the men of Judah to meet King David. There were 1,000 men of Benjamin with him, with Ziba, the servants of the house of Saul, and his 15 sons, and his 20 servants with him, and they rushed to the Jordan before the king. Then they kept crossing the ford to bring over the king's household, and to do what was good in his sight. Okay, did you catch it? 1,000 Benjamites came with the tribe of Judah and with Shimei and with Ziba and the servants, okay, to come help David cross and all the people cross across the Jordan River. And that included Ziba and his servants. And for 1,000 Benjamites to come to the river to help David's folks move back across, it had to mean that there were tens of thousands of people who were still with David that needed to come across. You remember, it was just the folks from Jerusalem to begin with, but then after David got to Mahanaim, remember in the story how all of those who were in support of David, especially the soldiers, came to be with David. Now, when Absalom died, the army of Absalom got dissipated back to the house or to their tents, wherever they lived. But remember, David's army probably did not leave David unguarded. More than likely, all those who came to assist David in the battle had decided to stay with David until he was safely back in Jerusalem. Now for Shimei, in verse number 18b, we hear this. And Shimei, the son of Gera, fell before the king as he was about to cross the Jordan. So he said to the king, Let not my lord consider me guilty, nor remember what your servant did wrong on the day when my lord the king came out of Jerusalem, so that the king would take it to heart. For your servant knows that I have sinned. Therefore, behold, I have come today, the first of all the house of Joseph, to go down to meet my lord the king. And Abishai, the son of Zeruiah, said, Should not Shimei be put to death for this? Because he cursed the Lord's anointed. And David then said, What do I have to do with you, O son of Zeruiah, that you should this day be an adversary to me? Should any man be put to death in Israel today? For do I not know that I am king over Israel today? The king said to Shimei, You shall not die. Thus the king swore to him. Shimei was also a Benjamite who lived in Bahurim, if you remember. And he was not a descendant of Joseph. That's kind of interesting. So if he was not a descendant of Joseph, he was not from Manasseh or from Ephraim, why did he say that he was the first of the house of Joseph to go down to meet my lord the king? When David first became king, Only the tribe of Judah recognized him as the king. The other tribes recognized Ishbosheth as king, if you remember. It was a divided kingdom. Ishbosheth's kingdom was called the house of Joseph because Ishbosheth made his capital city the city of Mahanaim in the tribal area of Manasseh. Manasseh was the oldest son of Joseph. So follow me here. When David left his hiding place in Mahanaim and crossed the Jordan River to return to Jerusalem, Shimei was at the river to be the first person from the old kingdom of Ishbosheth. That's what he's saying. I'm of the old kingdom of Ishbosheth, the house of Joseph. And he was the first to welcome David back into the tribal area of Benjamin. He was the first person of all the tribes to welcome David home besides Judah. Now Shimei knew he was guilty before David, and he admitted his sins before David. David did not punish Shimei that day because David was not in Jerusalem yet, and he had not taken his throne back yet, and David was not sure that all of Israel was truly going to accept him yet. It's still a mess, but that will come. Neither will David forget Shimei, and think about this. David will instruct Solomon to deal with Shimei when Solomon becomes king. As a quick reminder, Shimei will only last 3 years after Solomon becomes king, and we find that in 1 Kings chapter 2. Well, as he's meeting all these people, he meets Mephibosheth, and David has to deal with the controversy with Mephibosheth. And if you remember, David had heard that Mephibosheth had remained in Jerusalem to restore the crown to the family of Saul. It was a lie told by Ziba, who was in the parade with David headed back towards Jerusalem. So, after hearing of David's victory over the mutiny, verse 24 tells us this about this story. Then Mephibosheth, the son of Saul, came down to meet the king, and he had neither cared for his feet, nor trimmed his mustache, nor washed his clothes from the day the king departed until the day he came home in peace. Okay, until now, we did not know Mephibosheth's mental state about the mutiny. Now we know. He was grieved beyond belief for David the whole time David was gone. He wanted David to be victorious and to come home in peace. But he was going to grieve as if he wasn't coming home in peace until he finally came home. He had no assurance that he would ever see David again. And when the way he took care of himself showed that he was in total grief. And when he approached David at the Jordan River, I have learned much. Verse number 25, listen to this. It was when he came from Jerusalem to meet the king that the king said to him, "Why did you not go with me, Mephibosheth?" So he answered, "O my lord, the king, my servant deceived me. For your servant said, I will saddle a donkey for myself, that I may ride on it and go with the king, because your servant is lame." Okay, now let's clear up the servants who are mentioned here in this verse. Now, Ziba was Mephibosheth's servant, if you remember. Mephibosheth was David's servant. So for clarity, let's reword verse 22 and insert the names Ziba and Mephibosheth so that we understand, all of us understand clearly who Mephibosheth is talking about. I am sure these are exactly the words from Mephibosheth because they are not Hebraically clear to us who's speaking in this passage we're reading and in the next passage we're reading. So this must be word for word what Mephibosheth said. He says, "Oh my Lord," that's talking about David, "the king, my servant," he says, talking about Ziba, "deceived me," he is Mephibosheth. "For your servant," that's Mephibosheth, "said, I," that's Mephibosheth, "will saddle a donkey for myself," myself being Mephibosheth, "that I," Mephibosheth, may ride on it and go with the king, because your servant Mephibosheth is lame. Okay, so Mephibosheth's purpose in this statement, which David must have understood, was that he wanted to mount a donkey and go with David, but Ziba deceived him and did not let him leave Jerusalem. Now, David had learned about Mephibosheth saying he was staying in Jerusalem from Ziba. Okay, if you remember, Ziba told David that Mephibosheth remained in Jerusalem to restore the throne to Saul's line, and that was a lie. We have to wonder if Ziba thought both Absalom and David might die. Or was Ziba planning a second coup to eliminate Absalom if he became king? We will never know, but he had to have a reason in mind. But now his lie to David about Mephibosheth will come to light. Verse number 27. Let's mark also this passage as we go through it for clarity on who Mephibosheth is speaking about. Moreover, he has slandered your servant. Talking about what Ziba did to Mephibosheth. To my lord the king. But my lord the king is like the angel of God. Therefore, do what is good in your sight. For all my father's household was nothing but dead men before my lord the king. Yet you set your servant, that's Mephibosheth, among those who ate at your own table. What right do I, that's Mephibosheth, have yet that I, that's Mephibosheth, should complain any more to the king? So the king said to him, Why do you, Mephibosheth, still speak of your affairs? I, David, have decided. You, Mephibosheth, and Ziba shall divide the land. Mephibosheth said to the king, Let him even take it all, since my lord the king has come safely to his own house. So Mephibosheth has completely thrown himself at the mercy of David. He also understood that his grandfather's kingship was dead by decree of the Lord. He also had nothing to complain about David at all. Then David decided to split Mephibosheth's land with Ziba. And when David initially brought Mephibosheth to Jerusalem, if you remember, David split the land between him and Ziba in order for Ziba to have provisions for his family also. And when David ran from Jerusalem and met Ziba on the way out of town, he gave all of Mephibosheth's land to Ziba because of that lie that Ziba had told. Now David is returning to his original decision. Notice Mephibosheth is willing for Ziba to have it all. David did not change his mind. But we have to think that this scenario must have been a training time for Solomon, who would become the next king of Israel in about 7 years or so. It set the lesson in place for not splitting the baby. Did Solomon learn that lesson from Mephibosheth? I think he probably did. Now, Barzillai had been a friend and a true friend of David and a supporter of David for a long time. David wanted Barzillai to come to be his permanent guest in Jerusalem, but Barzillai had a different plan. Verse number 31. Now Barzillai the Gileadite had come down from Rogelim, and he went on to the Jordan with the king to escort him over the Jordan. Now Barzillai was very old, being 80 years old, and he has sustained the king while he stayed at Mahanaim, for he was a very great man. And the king said to Barzillai, You cross over with me, and I will sustain you in Jerusalem with me. But Barzillai said to the king, How long have I yet to live, that I should go up with the king to Jerusalem? I am now 80 years old. Can I distinguish between good and bad, Or can your servant taste what I eat or what I drink? Or can I hear any more the voice of singing men and women? Why then should your king be an added burden to my lord the king? Your servant would merely cross over the Jordan with the king. Why should the king compensate me with his reward? Please, let your servant return, that I may die in my own city, near the grave of my father and my mother. However, here is your servant Chimham. Let him cross over with my lord the king, and do for him what is good in your sight. And the king answered, Chimham shall cross over with me, and I will do for him what is good in your sight, and whatever you require of me, I will do for you. All the people crossed over the Jordan, and the king crossed too. And the king kissed Barzillai and blessed him, and he returned to his place. Now let's catch up with what's happening here. Barzillai was a wealthy man of the tribal area of Manasseh, of the tribe of Manasseh also. 80 years old, he supported David and his warriors and their families while they were on the run from Absalom. And David was forever grateful to Barzillai for his kindness. And as an older man, Barzillai did not want to leave his home and become a burden to David by eating at his table for the rest of his life. However, he did ask David to take his son Chimham instead. And David said, I will do for him what is good in your sight, and whatever you require of me, I will do for you. Well, we do not know what Barzillai asked David to do with Chimham. Nevertheless, we can be assured that David indeed fulfilled his promise to Barzillai. Here is what we know what David did for Chimham also, okay? So we don't know what Barzillai asked, but we do know what David did for Chimham. First, he gave him land in Bethlehem, the tribal area of David. Now, Chimham is from the tribe of Manasseh, but David gave him some land down in Bethlehem. Second, he instructed Solomon to care for Chimham in 1 Kings chapter 2, verse 7. Solomon did. He took care of Chimham. Then way over hundreds of years later, in Jeremiah 41:17, we find out what Chimham did with the land. He built an inn in Bethlehem with the land. And that inn in Bethlehem was nicknamed the Geruth, or the Caravanus of Chimham, which is in Bethlehem. That means it was an inn for travelers from the caravans to stop and to spend the night. And that's over in the days of the ending days of the fall of the southern kingdom to Nebuchadnezzar during the ministries of Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and Daniel. We're talking hundreds of years later. So Bethlehem was David's home. It is doubtful that the inn still belonged to Chimham's family, because there was a law, if you remember, that required that anything that had been given or had been sold of the land at the end of every 50 years, the 50th year, that land was to be returned to whoever the original inheritance was given to during the days of Joshua, which means no matter who bought it or who sold it, it was returned to David's family at the end of 50 years. Nevertheless, even in Jeremiah's day, Chimham's nickname still stayed with the inn and the shepherd's field in Bethlehem. And as we have seen that the Israelite nicknames of old consistently stuck with these map locations all the way through the Old and New Testament, no doubt it was Chimham's inn that he built where Jesus was born and the shepherds were abiding in the field that Chimham had been given. Now, when David arrived at Gilgal, folks, he had to deal with these Western Israelites again. Before we moved to this verse, let's talk about Gilgal. Okay, I've already mentioned it to you once in this lesson, and I want to mention it to you again. In Israel, there are two places called Gilgal: Camp Gilgal and the village or city of Gilgal. Camp Gilgal is where the Israelites camped the first night after they crossed the Jordan River to take the promised land with Joshua. The village of Gilgal was built several miles north of the camp much later, and in this case, the passage we are talking about is the original Camp Gilgal, which stood just outside the original city of Jericho before the walls came tumbling down. Jericho folks could look over the walls and see the camp, the massive camp of Israel at the camp of Gilgal. Verse number 40. Now the king went on to Gilgal, and Chimham went on with him, and all the people of Judah and also half the people of Israel accompanied the king. And behold, all the men of Israel came to the king and said to the king, Why had our brothers, the men of Judah, stolen you away and brought the king and his household and all David's men over the Jordan? Then all the men of Judah answered the men of Israel, Because the king is a close relative of us. Why then are you angry about this matter? Have we eaten at all at the king's expense, or has anything been taken for us? But the men of Israel answered the men of Judah and said, We have 10 parts in the king, therefore we also have more claim on David than you. Why then did you treat us with contempt? Was it not our advice first to bring back our king? Yet the words of the men of Judah were harsher than the words of the men of Israel. The question of the Israelites from the west side and the harsh words of the men of Judah caused a new problem for David. Another little mess tagged on to the big mess. The western Israelites had already settled the issue and welcomed David's return. But there was a problem with the tribe of Judah accepting David. That was finally resolved, we hear, and then Judah and the eastern Israelites moved David across the river without notifying the western Israelites of the move. Western Israel felt slighted. In the conversation, everything went south, just went south. The nation is now split again because David is returning to be the king of Jerusalem. It is one trouble after another for David, and it's about to get worse. Someone was still stirring the pot in western Israel. Who was it? There is always some holdover from a conspiracy and mutiny who wants to hang around and make things right again. Not according to what the people want, but according to what he wants. People who participate in planning and implementing a conspiracy and mutiny need to be dismissed immediately. Those people will do nothing but cause confusion and disharmony, as we will see. Well, the chapter 20 break is unfortunate because David is still struggling with the controversy over returning to the throne as king. And at Gilgal, western Israel and eastern Israel with Judah had words. And the meeting did not end well. And at the end of the meeting, we will meet Sheba. Sheba was the pot stirrer. Sheba was the conspiracy and mutiny holdover. Chapter 20, verse 1. Now a worthless fella happened to be there, whose name was Sheba, the son of Berchri, a Benjamite. And he blew the trumpet and said, We have no portion in David, nor do we have inheritance in the son of Jesse. Every man to his tent, O Israel. We were unaware of the leader of Absalom's conspiracy and mutiny until now. It was Sheba, because he was the spokesman of the people of the western Israel that followed Absalom. In the verbal battle with Judah's leadership, Sheba drew a line in the sand and disbanded the meeting, sending everyone home and destroying the negotiations, and all of western Israel left. The line in the sand was a conversation ender. He successfully led western Israel away from David that day. At least in his mind, he did. And those who looked at him before during the conspiracy with Absalom evidently still looked to him for leadership, and they left and they went home. But the Lord had a different plan. But we come to Sheba's harm to the nation of Israel now after the conspiracy, and this is the way this happens. These are the guys who always have to stay around and hang around because they want to fix the problem that was there. They want to correct it in their way, but not let the people choose their way. Their loyalty of David's kingdom was once again divided. Chapter 20, verse 2. So all the men of Israel withdrew from following David and followed Sheba, the son of Bichri. But the men of Judah remained steadfast to their king, from the Jordan even to Jerusalem. Now, let's be clear about something else. All the men of Israel was how the compiler identified the Jews who were part of Absalom's army in the mutiny. David's men were called the servants of David. That was his army. Only those of Absalom's army left David at the river, not David's army. In addition, the men of Judah did not follow Sheba, but stayed with David, whom they had just affirmed to be the king. What a mess. How quickly people change their minds. How quickly people can be led astray by the holdovers of a mutiny. How dangerous can they be? Think of John Wilkes Booth for that answer if you want an example. John Wilkes Booth was a sympathizer and a holdover, but was never really part of the conspiracy. But he wanted to make things right. He was a holdover. But in this case, Sheba was part of the conspiracy, and he's a holdover that has survived. With the negotiations ended, David continued to Jerusalem, verse number 3. Then David came to his house at Jerusalem, and the king took the 10 women, the concubines whom he had left to keep the house, and placed them under guard, and provided them with sustenance, but did not go into them. So they were shut up until the day of their deaths, living as widows. Okay. Still, in a politically divided kingdom, all David could do as king when he went back was to care for his family in Jerusalem. He does not have a full kingdom yet. When taking care of his family, it included those 10 concubines of David that Absalom had defiled. Those 10 concubines were now impure to David because they had been violated. They could not be pure again in any way, form, or fashion. The text says that they were treated as widows of the living. What does that mean? Well, it's a Hebrew saying. They were treated as if their husband had died even while he was still living. David did not divorce these women. Therefore, no man could ever legally take them as a wife. Furthermore, because of Absalom's act on them, they could no longer be considered part of the royal harem of David, and neither could they be set free. David's responsibility was to care for them until their deaths or his deaths. If he died first, the next king would care for them also. David had no marital relations with them again because they were unclean. Further, they could not be seen in the streets because it would have brought the shame of the sin of Absalom to the mind of Israel again. What a sad state. David recognized the harm to Israel by Sheba's defiance. He knew the problem at Gilgal was caused by the leader of Judah and their attitude toward Sheba and Israel. David decided to call Amasa and gave him an order. Verse number 4. Then the king said to Amasa, "Call out the men of Judah for me within 3 days, and be present here yourself." So Amasa went to call out the men of Judah, but he delayed longer than the set time which he had appointed him. And David said to Abishai, Now Sheba, the son of Bichri, will do us more harm than Absalom. Take your Lord's servants and pursue him, so that he does not find for himself fortified cities and escape from our sight. So Joab's men went out after him, along with the Cherethites and the Pelethites and all the mighty men, and they went out from Jerusalem to pursue Sheba, the son of Bichri. When they were at the large stone which is in Gibeon, Amasa came to meet them. Now Joab was dressed in military attire, and over it was a belt with a sword in its sheath fastened at his waist. And as he went forward, it fell out. Joab said to Amasa, Is it well with you, my brother? And Joab took Amasa by the head with his right hand to kiss him. You have to understand, bad blood existed between Amasa and Joab. Joab had been the commander of David's army for many decades, and Amasa had been the commander of Absalom's army. However, David had offered Amasa the position of commander above Joab, which did not set well with Joab clearly. And in this case, in this passage, Amasa had missed David's deadline to capture and bring the men of Judah to David. David assigned Joab and Abishai, his brother, they were brothers if you remember, to catch Sheba and bring in Sheba before him, before Sheba could barricade himself somewhere where they couldn't get to him. Amasa and Joab met each other along the way, and Joab offered Amasa the normal greeting of the Israelite. They would kiss on the cheeks. But Joab's greeting turned into Amasa's murder, verse number 10. But Amasa was not on guard against the sword which was in Joab's hand, so he struck him in the belly with it and poured out his inward parts on the ground and did not strike him again, and he died. Then Joab and Abishai his brother pursued Sheba, the son of Bichri. Now there stood by him one of Joab's young men and said, Whoever favors Joab and whoever is for David, let him follow Joab. But Amasa lay wallowing in his blood in the middle of the highway. And when the man saw that all the people stood still, he removed Amasa from the highway into the field and threw a garment over him. When he saw that everyone who came by him stood still. He was the commander of David's army. Joab killed his opponent. No doubt Joab was hurt that he was no longer the commander of David's army. And by killing Amasa, David then called for the loyalty of Amasa's warriors, David's army. And only one young warrior paused to do something about Amasa. We have to wonder if he questioned the tactics of Joab. Sheba barricaded himself in the city of Abel Beth-Maachah, just as David had feared. It was a double-walled city. And as Joab pounded the city, a woman called out from the top of the city wall. Here's the story. We will let it tell us what happened to Sheba's head. Verse number 13. As soon as he was removed from the highway, all the men passed on after Joab to pursue Sheba, the son of Bichri. Now he went through all the tribes of Israel to Abel, even Beth-Maachah, and all the Beerites. And they were gathered together and also went after him. And they came and besieged him in Abel Beth-Maachah, and they cast up a siege ramp against the city, and it stood by the rampart. And all the people who were with Joab were wrecking destruction in order to topple this wall. And then a wise woman called out from the city, Here, here, please tell Joab, come here that I may speak with you. So he approached her, and the woman said, Are you Joab? And he answered, I am. And then she said to him, "Listen to the words of your maidservant." And he answered, "I am listening." And then she spoke, saying, "Formerly they used to say, 'They will surely ask advice at Abel,' and thus they ended the dispute. I am of those who are peaceable and faithful in Israel. You are seeking to destroy a city, even a mother in Israel. Why would you swallow up the inheritance of the Lord?" Joab replied, Far be it from me that I should swallow up or destroy. Such is not the case. But a man from the hill country of Ephraim, Sheba, the son of Bichri, by name, has lifted up his hand against King David. Only hand him over, and I will depart from the city. And the woman said to Joab, "Behold, his head will be thrown to you over the wall." Then the woman wisely came to all the people, and they cut off the head of Sheba the son of Bichri and threw it to Joab. So he blew the trumpet, and they were dispersed from the city, each to his tent. Joab also returned to the king at Jerusalem. I must pause as I think about the justice in this story. The woman saved the city by taking the head of one inhabitant. Yes, he was a holdover from the conspiracy and mutiny. Yes, he had divided the kingdom against David for the second time, really the third time. But why did she not just lead the people to deliver Sheba alive to Joab? That would have had the same desired effect on her city. Evidently, she had enough influence to take his head. Why did she not use that same influence to give him his whole body alive? Open the gate, deliver it to Joab. David's order was to find Sheba. And by extension, we might determine that David's order was to detain Sheba, to bring him to David. But David did not want him dead. Or we might ask the question, did David want him dead? And I don't think he did. David never did that type of thing. Had Joab disobeyed David's order again? I think you might say, yes, he has disobeyed order because he's agreed to have the head be thrown to him. But you also might say, no, he didn't disagree David's order, because the woman was the one who made the decision to kill Sheba. And she did. So we don't know how David is going to deal with this, but Sheba had found a fortified city just as David had worried. And what now? Sheba is dead. With Sheba's death, the controversy with Israel ended. But David's organizational structure had to be built brand new. David had to be assured that the conspirators and the mutineers were out of the picture, and only the loyal were in. When there's been a conspiracy or a mutiny, you never hang on to those who were part of the conspiracy and the mutiny. They must be put out. Those who never joined the mutiny would be in. And the compiler gave a summary of David's newly established leadership, verse number 23. Now Joab was over the whole army of Israel. That's the same. And Benaiah, the son of Jehoiada, was over the Cherethites and the Pelethites. That was the same. And Adoram was over the forced labor. Jehoshaphat, the son of Ahilud, was the recorder. Sheva was scribe. And Zadok and Abiathar were priests. And Ira, the Jerethite, was also a priest to David. Okay, let me run through this again. Joab had been dismissed as the commander, so David reinstated him. Benaiah was still the same position as the commander of the bodyguards with the Cherethites and the Pelethites, and Hat was the same. He had been loyal to David for all those years. Adoram held a newly established office over the forced labor, and he would continue with this position into the days of Solomon. He was a new person. Forced laborers were not slaves, folks. Israelites forced labor. The Israelites forced their men to do forced labor. And what does it mean by that? When they're doing government projects, they would pick a month and they would have the men come for a month and labor for the government, and then they'd go home for the other 11 months to do their jobs and their work. And so these men were paid. They were forced to work in the building constructions of the government projects, but they were paid. This is kind of like forced men going into, for a long, long time, where our young men had to go in the army. They were forced warriors. They had to go into the army. Then I think that ended, I think the year was 1974 when that ended, or 73, 74. They would work for a limited time and then they would return to their homes to work their normal jobs. Jehoshaphat held the same office that he held before, and so did Zadok and Abiathar. Now Ira is new to the list, serving as a priest. He's brand new, so some others are out. He's in. And to compare these two lists, David's first list, the first summary of the officials, was found back in 2 Samuel chapter 8. We're not going to take the time to look at it. But we'll find this list now shows that David was now well established again in his second term as king of Israel, although it will end in fewer than 7 years. Now the two lists are a sign to us that all conspirators and mutineers are to be removed from their offices with haste, because they can no longer be trusted. Well, by this time in the story, some might think that David was at the end of his troubles as king of the kingdom, but he was not. Now, I am glad we're through with the text that deals with the conspiracy and the mutiny. We are through with that. But with David back on his throne in Israel, he had to face a 3-year famine. The famine did not come because of anything David did or anyone else in David's kingdom. You're going to find this interesting, what David has to deal with. The famine came because of something King Saul did at least 40 years before. And the context of our next lesson will teach us that sin always has a reckoning day, even long after the sinner is gone.